They had been the kind of love story that makes other people believe in love. 48 years, one king, one Luna. A bond so deep the pack felt it like weather, present, reliable, the fixed point around which everything else moved. Then she came. No one remembered exactly when the woman with the amber eyes had arrived, only that one day she wasn't there, and the next day she was everywhere. Warm where she shouldn't have been warm, present in rooms she hadn't been invited into, standing 2 steps behind the king with a smile that never quite finished itself. Within 6 months, everything Stellin had built was gone. The dissolution happened in the Great Hall, in front of everyone. 4 minutes, that was all it took to erase 48 years, strip her title, empty her name from every room she had filled with her life. No warning, no private conversation, no mercy. Just the king's flat, distant voice, reading words that didn't sound like his, and the pack watching in silence with hollow eyes, and the new queen standing in winter flowers as though she'd been born to the throne. Stellin walked out with one small bag. At the bottom of it, forgotten in the seam of an old pocket, worn smooth with time, a single gold coin. She took the road no one took, to land everyone called cursed. And with that one coin, she bought a broken cabin in dead ground. What they never saw coming was what she built next. If you love intense wolf stories with destiny and twists, go ahead and subscribe to the channel right now. So subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any chapters. And how about we get to know each other better? I'm Maggie Reed, the author of these stories. And you? Drop a comment below with your name and what city you're watching from. The great doors of Ironspire Castle had never looked so heavy. Stellin had walked through them 1,000 times, as a young bride trembling with hope, as a Luna commanding the court with quiet authority, as a mother watching her son ride away toward a horizon she could not follow. She knew every iron bolt on those doors, every scratch left by decades of ceremony and storm, but she had never once imagined she would walk through them with a single bag on her shoulder and the sound of an entire pack watching in silence behind her back. She did not look back. She could not. Her boots found the stone path on their own, the way a body moves when the mind has gone somewhere far away just to survive. The morning air hit her face like cold water, sharp, unforgiving, smelling of pine resin and the damp earth of a kingdom she had helped build with her own 2 hands. 52 years of life had passed inside those walls, 48 of them beside Raor. 48 years, and it had taken him less than 4 minutes to end it. She had been standing in the grand court when he walked in with her, the woman with the amber eyes and the smile that didn't quite reach the corners of her mouth, the woman who called herself Cyrath, and who had appeared at court 6 months ago like smoke filling a room no one had noticed was empty. Stellin had watched Cyrath for those 6 months, the way you watch a fire you can't explain, too still, too controlled, too warm in all the wrong directions. And she had noticed, though she had never spoken it aloud, that the air nearest to Cyrath ran warm even in cold halls, a sourceless heat that had nothing to do with the hearths. That sometimes, if you caught her at the wrong angle in torchlight, the edges of her face didn't quite settle. Like a reflection disturbed by something moving just beneath the water. But Raor had stopped seeing anything that Stellin saw. That morning, he had stood before the full assembly, elders, warriors, omegas, the entire Ironspire pack, and declared the bond dissolved. No warning, no private conversation, no mercy. His voice had been flat and distant, like a man reading words someone else had written, and Stellin had thought, that is not how he sounds. That has never been how he sounds. But the declaration was done before she could open her mouth, sealed with the pack's witness, and Cyrath had stood beside him wearing a crown of winter flowers as though she'd been born to it. The humiliation had not been the loss of the title. It had been the silence of the pack. Not one voice, not one elder rising to question, not one warrior who had eaten at her table and carried her son on their shoulders stepping forward to say, wait. They had stood there watching with hollow eyes, and that hollowness had told Stellin something she had no name for yet, something wrong and deep and older than anything she understood. She had not cried. She had simply bent to pick up the small leather bag someone had quietly placed at her feet, her personal attendant, Mira, the only one who'd had the courage to look her in the eye, and she had walked out. But in the final second before she turned, she looked at Raor one last time. His hands were at his sides, holding the formal scroll, and his left hand, the one bearing the bond mark pressed to hers at their sealing ceremony, the one he had offered while laughing and 22 and ridiculous with joy, was trembling. So slightly that no one further than 3 paces would have caught it. A tremor running from knuckle to wrist and back, the body remembering what the mind had been made to forget. And once, barely, a sound that almost wasn't. His voice snagged on a syllable before the final witness seal. Not quite a word. Not quite her name. Swallowed before it could become either. Stellin had been listening to that voice for 48 years. She heard it. She walked out anyway. The path from Ironspire stretched north through the valley and then split in 3 directions at the great oak marker carved with the pack's sigil. Stellin stopped there, breathing slowly, her fingers tight around the bag strap. Inside, 2 changes of clothes, a small knife for practical use, the dried rose from her son Everin's last birthday, and at the very bottom, caught in the corner seam of an old inner pocket, a single gold coin she had completely forgotten existed. She'd found it the night before while packing, half buried under a silk lining she hadn't touched in years. It was worn smooth, the stamp barely visible, but her fingers knew it before her eyes confirmed it. The twin wolf sigil of the Ironspire founding line, minted in the first year of Raor's reign to mark their bond sealing ceremony. He had pressed one into her palm that day, grinning with both hands wrapped around hers, and said for luck, not for spending. She had carried it for years before the weight of everything else buried it. She closed her fingers around it. 1 coin. She had helped oversee a treasury that held thousands of them. She had authorized trade agreements that moved wealth across 4 territories. And now she stood at a crossroads with 1 worn coin and a bag that didn't quite close properly at the top. Something inside her chest, not her heart, deeper, the part of her that had always known how to survive, made a decision before her mind caught up. She took the road east. They called it the Gravewin territory, and the name alone was enough to keep most travelers on the other 2 roads. 3 generations of pack elders had agreed unanimously that the land east of the Great Oak was cursed, contaminated, beyond use. The soil grew nothing. The wells ran bitter. Travelers who pushed too far in reported feeling watched by something with no shape and no sound, and most turned back before nightfall. Stellin had never put much faith in rumors born from fear. She walked for 2 full days. The territory earned its name. The light here had a gray quality to it even in mid-morning, filtered through a canopy so dense and tangled it looked less like a forest and more like something actively trying to keep the sky out. The path deteriorated quickly from packed dirt to soft mud to barely there suggestion, and twice Stellin stepped over the remains of what had once been road markers, swallowed almost completely by roots. She moved steadily, methodically, rationing the small portion of dried food she'd packed with the precision of someone who had learned long ago that panic burns more energy than it saves. On the morning of the 3rd day, she smelled smoke, not wildfire smoke, cook smoke, the low, familiar curl of a hearth doing its job. She followed it through a clearing choked with pale wild grass and found the cabin sitting at the tree line as though it had grown there and simply stopped halfway through becoming a tree. The structure was small and listing slightly to the left, its wooden walls gone silver gray with age, its single window boarded from the inside with what looked like an old door panel. The roof had a hole the size of a cartwheel at the back corner, and the front step was missing entirely, replaced by a flat stone someone had dragged over at some point and never removed. Beside the cabin, Crouched over a small fire pit with a clay pot of something that smelled aggressively like boiled roots was a woman. She was perhaps Stellin's age, with the kind of face that had clearly been laughing hard for decades and had the lines to prove it. And she was wearing an apron so thoroughly stained it had achieved a sort of abstract art quality. When she heard Stellin's footsteps, she looked up without alarm, the look of someone entirely too comfortable with strangers appearing unexpectedly in cursed territories. "You're either very lost or very brave," the woman said, stirring her pot without breaking eye contact. "Or you just walked from Ironspire, in which case I'd say you're probably both." Stellin stopped. "How would you know that?" "Because anyone walking toward Gravewin from the west with that particular expression either just lost everything or is about to do something monumentally stupid." She tilted her head, considering. "Though in my experience, those are often the same thing. I'm Bet." She gestured at the cabin with her spoon. "That wreck belongs to my brother. He doesn't use it. He won't sell it. I've been trying to convince him to burn it for 2 years, but he's sentimental about things that are technically falling apart." She paused. "You have coin?" Stellin opened her hand. The single gold piece sat in her palm, worn smooth, catching what little gray light filtered through the canopy. The ghost of the twin wolf sigil just visible if you knew to look. Betty stared at it. Then she stared at Stellin. Then back at the coin. That's 1 coin. I'm aware. The roof has a hole in it. I saw. There's something living in the walls. Stellin thinks it's harmless. I think he's being optimistic." Bet stood up, wiped her hands on the apron, which did nothing for either surface, and looked at the cabin with an expression that suggested she was mentally apologizing to it. "He's not here to ask, but he'd say yes. He always says yes. It's a character flaw." She held out her hand. "Deal." Stellin placed the coin in it. Bet closed her fingers around it and immediately dropped it into her apron pocket, with the casual certainty of someone completing a transaction she'd done 100 times. "Soup?" she offered, gesturing to the pot. "What's in it?" "Roots, some bark. What I hope is a mushroom." Bet peered into the pot with moderate concern. "It's better than nothing, which is coincidentally the name I've given it." For the first time in 4 days, Stellin almost smiled. She sat down on the grass beside the fire, wrapped both hands around the clay bowl Bet pressed into them, and looked at the cabin, her cabin now, paid for with the last coin she had in the world, and felt something shift in her chest. Not peace. Not yet. Something rawer and more honest than peace. The feeling of a woman who has just touched the absolute bottom and realized, with a strange and terrifying clarity, that the ground is solid. Inside the walls, something rustled. Bet pointed at it without looking up from her soup. "See? I told him. Optimism." But 50 miles west, in the grand court of Ironspire Castle, something had just changed. Cyrath stood perfectly still among the congratulations of the pack, her winter flower crown bright against her dark hair, her amber eyes warm and satisfied. Then she felt it, a hairline fracture opening silently in the gold ring on her right hand, the anchor that held everything in place. Her smile did not move. Her voice did not break. But her fingers closed slowly into a fist, and the sourceless warmth she radiated dropped, just for a moment, to something cold and very, very old. She crossed into Gravewin, Cyrath thought, and for just a breath, the edges of her face didn't quite settle. Stellin had slept in worse places. She told herself this 3 times during the first night in the cabin. Once when something in the wall scratched with unsettling purpose. Once when a gap in the roof sent a ribbon of cold air directly onto her face. And once at approximately 2 in the morning when the flat stone serving as a front step shifted under its own weight and produced a sound like a closing coffin. Each time she pulled the thin blanket Bet had produced from somewhere. Origin unspecified, cleanliness optimistically assumed. and counted the ceiling beams until her heartbeat slowed. 7 beams. She knew this with certainty by dawn. She was outside before the light fully arrived, sleeves rolled, hair pinned back, already working. The cabin was in poor condition, but poor condition was not hopeless. She had learned the difference between the two long before this morning. The foundation stones were solid. She checked each one by hand. The walls had weathered badly, but the joins held. The roof was the real problem. She had no tools, no materials, and exactly nothing left in the world except 48 years of knowing, in the bones of her hands, what could be saved. She was measuring the roof hole by eye when she heard footsteps at the edge of the clearing. Not Bet's. She already knew that rhythm, the cheerful, uneven cadence of someone perpetually about to tell you something. These were slower, deliberate. A man carrying split timber and tucked under his left arm with the resigned familiarity of long habit. A brown hen who was already forming strong opinions about the morning. He stopped when he saw her, looked at the cabin, looked at her, back at the cabin. "You're in my clearing," he said. "I bought your cabin." A pause. The hen objected loudly. He glanced down at it with the expression of a man who has had this conversation before and lost. Bet sold it. Bet facilitated the transaction. For how much? 1 coin. He set the timber against the nearest tree with the careful economy of someone who did not waste movements and studied her the way you study a roof, not unkindly, just honestly, looking for what needs doing. Up close, he was older than she'd first read, gray threading heavily through his dark hair, a long-healed scar along his left jaw that had clearly not been tended well at the time. His hands were the hands of someone who had worked hard ground for years and had stopped apologizing for it. "Stellin," he said, and offered one of those hands. "Stellin." His grip was firm, brief, and released without lingering. Then he looked up at the roof again, and she watched the sequence move across his face. Assessment, mild grimace, the specific resignation of a man constitutionally incapable of walking past something broken. "I have timber," he said. "The hole will be a problem before winter." "I'm aware. I'm not offering charity." He picked up the timber again. "I'm offering a roof." He glanced at her sideways, dry, unhurried, a man who chose his words the way he chose his tools. "You can be offended. The hole will still be there." Stellin considered him for a moment. "Do you always negotiate like this?" "I don't negotiate." He was already moving toward the cabin. "I just describe what's true." On the other side of the world, in the east tower of Iron Spire Castle, Raor had not slept. He was standing at the window. He did not remember walking there, which was the 3rd time this week he had found himself somewhere with no recollection of the journey, staring at the road that ran east through the valley toward the great oak marker. His left hand rested on the cold stone sill, and the bond mark on his palm was burning. A low, insistent heat, like an ember that refused to die regardless of how much he smothered it. He pressed his thumb against it and tried, as he always tried, to remember. There was a woman. He was certain of this the way you are certain of things you cannot prove. A bone-deep certainty that lived below language, below thought, in the part of him that had survived everything Cyrath had done to the rest. A woman whose voice he could almost hear when the castle was fully quiet, whose hands he almost recognized in the half-second before sleep pulled him under. He would wake reaching for something and find only cold sheets in the gray pre-dawn, and the ache that Cyrath called melancholy. And he knew, with that same wordless certainty, was something else entirely. The door opened behind him without a knock. She never knocked. He had noticed this months ago and then somehow stopped noticing it, the way you stop noticing a smell when you live inside it long enough. "You're up early." Cyrath crossed the room with the unhurried confidence of someone who considered every space they entered already theirs. The warmth she carried preceded her, that sourceless heat that pressed outward like noon sun through glass. She came to stand beside him at the window and looked out at the eastern road. And something in her expression, just for a fraction of a second, sharpened. "Bad dreams?" she asked. "I don't remember." "You were talking in your sleep again." Her hand came to rest over his on the sill. Where her fingers touched his, the burning stopped. He should have felt relief. He felt loss. "What did I say?" he asked. A pause, brief, controlled, the pause of someone selecting rather than searching. "Nothing clear. You never do." She turned from the window, drawing him gently by the hand. "Come away from here. Looking east never helps." He let himself be turned. He always did. But before he moved, he asked, and he didn't know why he asked, except that the burning had been so strong this morning, stronger than any morning before. "The Luna. He stopped. The word had been there a moment ago. He was certain of it. "The woman who left. Do you know where she left," Cyrath said, and her voice was perfectly gentle, perfectly even, the voice of someone explaining something simple to someone who keeps forgetting. That was her choice. "You gave her every opportunity." Her thumb moved across his knuckles, and the fog that lived at the edges of his mind rolled inward, soft and thorough as tide. "You have to stop punishing yourself for someone else's decision." He nodded. He had no idea why his eyes had filled. Cyrath watched his face with the focused attention of a craftsperson checking their work, checking what held, what had slipped, what needed reinforcing. When she was satisfied, she smiled, and the smile reached exactly as far as she decided it should. "Breakfast," she said, "and then the morning audience. The pack needs to see you." She left without waiting for his answer. Raor stood alone in the east tower for a moment longer. His left hand was still on the sill. The burning had stopped where her fingers had been, but it had not stopped in the center of his palm, in the old mark he could not explain, in the place that had been pressing against the fog for months, like something trying to get out. He looked at it. For luck, something said, in a voice he almost recognized. Not for spending. He didn't know what it meant. He closed his fist and went downstairs. By mid-morning, Stellin was on the roof and Stellin was passing timber up from the ground, and Bet had materialized from some indeterminate location with a pot of porridge and the expression of a woman witnessing the precise outcome she had engineered. "I knew it," she announced. "You sold my cabin," Stellin said from above, hammering without looking down. "I created conditions." Bet settled onto a log with serene authority. "Stellin fixes things. You have things that need fixing." The mathematics were straightforward. She peered into her pot. "I've also made porridge." "Does it have a name?" Stellin asked. "Better than—" "Yes," Stellin said. Bet looked pleased. "You're learning." From the roof, a sound came down. Low, brief, quickly reined in. The laugh of a man who had grown careful about what he let show. Stellin heard it and felt something move through her chest without warning. Small, warm, and entirely unwelcome in its timing. She kept her eyes on the work. She was not ready. She knew this. The ground beneath her was solid, yes. But solid and safe were different things, and she had confused them once before at the cost of 48 years. What she needed now was not warmth. What she needed was a roof, a foundation, and enough time to remember who she was when she wasn't someone's Luna. Above her, Stellin hammered another nail into place. 50 miles west, in the east tower of Ironspire Castle, Cyrath stood at the window Raor had just left, and looked east down the road he had been watching, and felt the ring on her right hand pulse once, twice, with the hairline fracture that had appeared the moment Stellin crossed into Gravewin. It was getting wider. She pressed her thumb against the crack, and her face, just for a moment, in the empty room with no one watching, did not quite hold its shape. Something older and colder looked out from behind the amber eyes. something that had been running for centuries and had grown very tired of being interrupted. You have no idea what you are, she thought, looking east. But you're starting to wake up. And that I cannot allow. The soil of Gravewin was not dead when... Stellin discovered this on the fourth morning, when she drove a stick into the earth near the cabin's east wall to mark where the foundation needed shoring, and the ground pulled back. Not gave way, not crumbled, but pulled. A subtle resistance like muscle beneath skin, as though the land were testing the weight of her intention before deciding what to do with it. She drove the stick in again. The ground held it. She stood back and looked at the clearing, the pale grass, the tangled canopy, the light that filtered through gray and thin, and felt something she hadn't felt in 4 days. Not hope exactly. Something more practical than hope. The particular alertness of a woman who has just noticed that the problem in front of her is different from the problem she thought she had. "You're doing that thing," Bet said from behind her. Stellin didn't turn. "What thing?" "The thing where you look at something broken and start calculating." Bet appeared at her shoulder with a mug of something hot, pressed it into Stellin's hands without asking, and squinted at the ground with collaborative interest. "Stellin does it too, with roofs mostly. You do it with..." She gestured broadly at the entire territory. "Everything." "The soil isn't dead," Stellin said. "Everyone says it is. Everyone is wrong." She crouched and pressed her palm flat against the earth. Cool, dense. The smell of it came up clean and dark. Nothing rotten, nothing diseased, just old. Old and waiting, the way a room that's been shut too long waits. Not for something to be added, but for someone to simply open the door. It's been dormant. There's a difference. Bet looked at the ground, then at Stellin, with the expression of someone recalibrating a prior assessment upward. "How do you know?" "Because I've been a Luna for 48 years. She stood, brushing earth from her palm. "Dead ground smells like ending. This smells like before." What Stellin did not know, what no one in Gravewin knew, because no one in Gravewin had been told, was why the territory had gone dormant in the first place. The elders who declared it cursed had been right about one thing. Something had happened here. 3 generations ago, this land had been the edge of a thriving territory, home to a pack long since scattered. The pack had not left because of plague or famine or any natural disaster the surrounding territories could identify. They had simply diminished. One by one, then in groups, then all at once, until the land stood empty and the light went gray and nothing grew. What the elders had not known was that a Cyrath had passed through. The Cyrath were old. Older than the pack histories, older than the bond laws, older than almost everything that still walked the world in a recognizable shape. They had been human once, or something close enough to human that the difference hadn't mattered, not at first. But one among them, centuries ago, had found a seam in the old magic where emotion and life force ran together, the way rivers run alongside each other before merging, and she had understood, with the cold clarity of a mind that had always wanted more than it had, that this seam could be opened. The magic she built from that discovery was simple in its mechanism and monstrous in its cost. She could take youth, beauty, vitality, the electric force of a life being fully lived. All of it flowed through human emotion like current through water. Love was the strongest conductor. Grief ran a close second. She had learned to wear human faces the way others wore cloaks, assuming them, discarding them, moving through generations without aging, feeding on the emotional intensity of every life she touched while her real body, hidden behind the stolen faces, continued its slow collapse into something centuries old and barely held together by borrowed light. She had given herself many names. Currently, she was Cyrath, and Raor had not been a target, not initially. She had come to Ironspire for a different king entirely, one who ruled the territory to the north, a man whose grief over a dead heir had made him incandescent with feedable pain. But she had passed through Ironspire on her way, and she had seen Raor in the great courtyard with his Luna, both of them old enough that the young warriors gave them distance, both of them so thoroughly and quietly in love that the air between them had practically hummed with it. 48 years of genuine love. She had never encountered anything that potent. She had stopped walking north that same afternoon. The fog she had built into Raor's mind was her finest work. Slow, patient, architecturally careful, designed not to erase, but to redirect. She did not want him broken. Broken men were empty vessels, useless. She wanted him suspended, conscious enough to feel everything, confused enough to attribute it to the wrong cause, hungry enough that his misdirected emotion fed her continuously. She had separated him from Stellin, not because Stellin was a threat to her physically, but because the love between them was a closed circuit she could not enter. Two people that thoroughly bonded were impenetrable. She needed distance between them, needed the grief of separation, needed Raor's loss to become an open wound she could sit beside indefinitely. What she had not anticipated was the shattered bond law. She had heard of it, the way you hear of things you consider irrelevant, old pack magic, foundational, rarely activated because the conditions required were almost impossible to meet. A Luna expelled without just cause, after a bond of decades, carrying the weight of genuine abandonment. If such a Luna crossed into unclaimed land, the law activated in the territory itself, not as a weapon, not as a spell. Simply as a truth the land recognized, something unjust has happened, and the one who was wronged is here now. And the law's effect was also simple. Any magic built on theft, stolen faces, stolen youth, stolen life force, would begin to degrade within the radius of that land. Slowly at first, then faster. The crack in Cyrath's ring was not a minor inconvenience. It was a clock. Stellin knew none of this. What she knew was that on the 5th morning, the pale grass in the clearing was slightly less pale, and on the 6th, a thin green line appeared along the base of the cabin's east wall where she had pressed her palm to the ground. And on the 7th, when she walked the perimeter of the territory at dawn the way she had walked Ironspire's walls every morning for 4 decades, the gray light seemed, fractionally, almost argumentatively, warmer. She didn't mention it to Bet, because Bet would make it into something, and she wasn't ready for it to be something yet. She mentioned it to Stellin by accident. He had come again that morning with more timber. The roof was sound now, the walls were next, and she had been walking the east perimeter when he arrived, and he had simply fallen into step beside her without asking, the way he did most things, without announcing himself, just appearing and being useful. They had walked in silence for a few minutes, which she had learned was not awkward with Stellin, but simply how he operated, a man who waited until he had something worth saying. "The grass is coming back," he said eventually. "I noticed. Gravewin hasn't grown anything in 60 years. A pause. Not since before I came here." She looked at him sideways. "How long have you been here?" 4 years. Another pause, the considered kind. "I came for the same reason most people come to cursed territories. It was the one place no one would follow." She waited. She had learned in 7 days that pressing Stellin produced silence, but patience produced sentences. "I had land," he said. "Territory. A pack, small but functional." He was watching the tree line as he spoke, not her, which she understood. Some things are easier to say to the middle distance. "I made choices that certain people found inconvenient. Men with more resources than principles decided the simplest solution was to ensure I no longer had anything worth taking." "A conspiracy," Stellin said quietly. "They prefer administrative restructuring." The dry edge in it was sharp enough to cut. "I lost the territory. The pack scattered. I ended up here with a broken cabin and a hen with strong opinions." He paused. Bet followed. She always follows. I've stopped trying to discourage her. She's devoted to you. She's devoted to chaos, and I happen to be nearby. But the corner of his mouth moved, that not-quite smile she was beginning to recognize. She's also the reason I'm still— He stopped, chose a different word. Functional. Stellin was quiet for a moment, watching the thin green line along the east wall from a distance. I had land too, she said. A kingdom, technically, for 48 years. I know. At her look. Beta. Of course. She almost smiled. She told you everything? She told me the version that made her seem like she'd planned it all from the beginning. A beat. Which, knowing Bet, she probably did. From the direction of the cabin, as if summoned by her name, Bet's voice carried across the clearing with the acoustic force of someone who had never once worried about being heard. Porridge is ready and I've improved the recipe. Stellin and Stellin looked at each other. That's terrifying, Stellin said. Every time, he agreed. They turned back toward the cabin, and Stellin looked at the green line along the wall and felt the ground solid beneath her feet, and thought, not for the first time, but for the first time without immediately pushing the thought away, that something was happening here. Not to her. Not at her. With her. As though the land and she had made an agreement she hadn't consciously signed but intended to honor. She didn't know yet what she was building. She only knew she was not done. 50 miles west, Cyrath stood over Raor's sleeping form in the gray before dawn. Her real hand, the one she kept hidden, the one that looked nothing like the smooth-skinned hand the castle saw, pressed flat against his temple. The fog needed reinforcing. He had said Stellin's name in his sleep last night, clearly, with the particular certainty of a man who had just, for one moment, remembered everything. She pressed harder, his breathing steadied. The crease between his brows slowly smoothed. Whatever door had cracked open in the night swung shut again, and he sank back into the gray room she had built for him, furnished with carefully selected fragments of a past she had edited to her own specifications. Cyrath withdrew her hand. Her ring pulsed. The crack was wider. She looked at it for a long moment with the expression of someone who has been running for 300 years and has just, for the first time, heard footsteps behind them. Faster, she told herself. You need to move faster. The first person to arrive in Gravewin came on foot, carrying everything she owned in a sack that had clearly lived a harder life than she had. She was perhaps 60, with the kind of face that had decided somewhere around the 4th decade to stop pretending and had been significantly more comfortable since. She walked into the clearing, looked at the cabin, looked at Stellin, looked at the thin green line running along the east wall that had, in the past 3 days, become a thin green carpet, and said, I heard the ground was coming back. Stellin set down her axe. Who told you that? Crow, the woman said, as though this were a complete and satisfying answer. A crow. My crow. He goes places. She dropped her sack on the ground and extended a hand with the brisk confidence of someone who had already decided this was going to work. Petra, I'm a builder. Stone mostly, some timber. I've been looking for somewhere that needed building. Stellin shook her hand. Stellin, I have a cabin. I can see that. Petra studied it with professional frankness. It's listing. We fixed the roof. The east wall needs shoring. I know. Petra picked up her sack. Where do I sleep? From inside the cabin, Bet's voice emerged through the repaired roof with impressive carrying power. There's room. I've already moved things. Stellin, who was reinforcing the west wall and had the expression of a man who had stopped being surprised by anything Bet did approximately 3 years ago, said without looking up, She moved my things. Your things were in a pile, Bet called back. They were an organized pile. Petra looked between all of them, made a rapid and apparently positive assessment, and walked inside. From within came the sound of Bet beginning an enthusiastic orientation tour of a structure that contained, at current count, 2 rooms and a ladder. Stellin looked at Stellin. Stellin looked at the wall. "It's starting," he said quietly. "What is?" He was quiet for a moment, that considered silence she had learned to read as him choosing between several true things. "When I first came here, I thought the territory was dead. Spent the first year just surviving. Not building, not planning. Surviving." He pressed his hand flat against the wall timber, checking the join. "Then I started fixing the cabin. Not because I thought it would matter. Just because broken things bother me. And the second month, the well ran clear." He glanced at her sideways. "Hadn't run clear in 60 years, according to Bet. She'd been carrying water from the creek half a mile out." Stellin looked at the east wall, at the green that was spreading now with a quiet insistence that reminded her of something. Of Ironspire's orchards in early spring. The way life returned not dramatically, but with determined, incremental patience. "You think it responds to intention," she said. "I think it responds to people who stay," he said. "Most people who come to cursed ground come to hide. They don't—" He paused. "Commit to it. You're not hiding." "How do you know what I'm doing?" He looked at her directly then, which he didn't do often, and when he did, it always had a quality of complete attention that was slightly unnerving in its honesty. "Because the first morning, you checked the foundation stones. All of them. By hand." A pause. "People who are hiding don't check foundations." Stellin held his gaze for a moment, then looked away first. Not from discomfort, but because something about being accurately seen still required adjustment. She had spent 48 years being seen as a title, a function, a Luna-shaped space in someone else's story. Being seen as herself was a different calibration entirely. "I'm going to need more timber," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. "I know." By the end of the second week, there were 4 of them. Petra had begun shoring the east wall the morning after she arrived, working with the focused efficiency of someone who had been waiting for a project worthy of her attention. She spoke mostly in assessments. "This joint is weak. That stone needs replacing. The drainage here will be a problem in winter." But occasionally, in the evenings around the fire, she produced observations about life with the same directness she applied to architecture, and they landed with similar force. The 4th arrival was a man named Oswin, young, perhaps 30, with the permanent expression of someone who expected to be told to leave and had developed elaborate contingency plans for this eventuality. He had heard about the clearing water from a trader 2 territories over. He explained with great earnestness, a gardener, and he had been looking for a place where things could grow without someone else deciding what they were allowed to become. Bet had adopted him within the hour. "He's like a very anxious plant," she told Stellin that evening, with audible fondness. "He just needs good soil and someone to stop standing on him." "Please don't tell him that." "I already did." He cried a little and then seemed much better. She stirred whatever was in the pot. It smelled for the first time like actual food. "I think I'm developing my recipe." Stellin looked into the pot with cautious optimism. "Is this still better than nothing?" "No." Bet looked genuinely pleased with herself. "This one is called something." A pause. "I think that's progress." It was, in fact, progress. Stellin ate 2 bowls and didn't mention it, which was its own kind of praise, and Bet received it with the dignity of an artist finally understood. That night, sitting outside while the others slept, Stellin looked at what had accumulated in 2 weeks. A sound roof, a shored wall, a cleared well. The beginnings of a garden plot Oswin had staked out with the reverent precision of someone laying foundations for a cathedral, and 4 people who had come to cursed ground and stayed. Not because she had asked them, not because of a title or a bond law or any obligation older than their own choice, because they wanted to. She pressed her palm to the earth beside her and felt it, warmer than it should have been, faintly alive beneath the surface, the way you can feel a fire through a wall before you open the door. "What are you?" she thought, not with fear, but with genuine curiosity. The ground did not answer, but the green line along the east wall had reached the corner post, and in the morning Oswin's staked garden would show, for the first time, the dark and promising color of soil that intended to cooperate. He found the song at the bottom of a dream. He didn't know it was a song at first. It came up the way things come up from deep water, shape before detail, the sense of something before the thing itself. He was in the gray room that served as sleep now, the room Cyrath had built for him brick by careful brick over months of patient, invisible work. And he was sitting at a table he didn't recognize, and across from him was a warmth he couldn't look at directly, the way you can't look directly at a source of light. And then the warmth was humming. 3 notes. A fragment of something longer, something old, a working song, the kind people sing when their hands are busy, unself-conscious and entirely unperformed. He knew it. He knew it so completely that his chest cracked open around the knowing, and in the crack, for just a second, the gray room went bright. He saw her hands, not her face. The face Cyrath had carefully blurred in his memory, replaced with a vague, pleasant shape that could have been anyone. But the hands were too specific to erase entirely, too particular. The way she held a quill too tightly, the small scar on her left thumb from a dropped blade in the 3rd year of their marriage, the way she pressed her palm flat to surfaces when she was thinking, testing the truth of things through touch. He lurched upright in the dark, fully awake, and said her name. It came out complete and certain and devastating. Stellin. Silence. The chamber. The cold pre-dawn pressing against the windows. And then, the door, opening without a knock. He turned. Cyrath stood in the doorway with the candle in her hand, casting shadows upward across her face. And in the unsteady light, something was wrong with the edges of her. A slight imprecision, like an image seen through water, like a face that was almost settling but not quite. He blinked, and it was gone, and she was simply there, looking at him with those amber eyes that were warm with everything except warmth. "You're awake," she said. I remembered her name. His voice came out rough, stripped of the careful nothing he'd been performing for months. Cyrath. I remembered her name, and I need to know, where did she go? What did I... Raor. Her voice was gentle. It was always gentle, the gentleness of someone who had practiced gentleness until it looked identical to the real thing. She crossed to him and took his face in both hands, and the fog rolled in immediately, soft and total, extinguishing the bright crack in his chest the way you smother a candle. You've been dreaming. It's happening more when you're under stress. It wasn't a dream. But his voice was already losing its certainty, the way voices lose things in fog. I knew her name. I knew her hands. You're exhausted. Her thumbs moved at his temples, slow and deliberate. The pack needs you present tomorrow. There are decisions that can't wait. Her eyes held his, and behind the warmth in them, very briefly, something else looked out, old and calculating and utterly without mercy. Come back to sleep. He went. He always went. But in the center of his left palm, the bond mark burned with a heat that Cyrath's hands could not reach. And in the 3 seconds before the fog took him completely, he thought, with the last clear corner of his mind, I know her hands. I know her hands. I know, and then the gray room, and then nothing, and... In Gravewin, at that same moment, Stellin woke suddenly from a sleep she hadn't realized she'd fallen into. Her left palm pressed to the earth, and felt something pass through her like a current. Not painful, not frightening. Just a recognition, quick and wordless as a heartbeat, gone before she could name it. She sat up, looked at her hand. The bond mark on her own palm, the one she had stopped looking at because looking at it still hurt, was warm. She closed her fingers over it slowly. Stop, she told herself. Not yet. Not that. She stood up, brushed earth from her hands, and went to check Oswin's garden in the dark. The first seedling had broken the surface. She crouched down and looked at it for a long time. This small, determined, improbably alive thing, pushing up through ground that wasn't supposed to grow anything. She didn't cry. She wasn't ready to cry yet, and she suspected that when the crying came, it would be enormous, and she intended to be somewhere private for it. But she pressed 2 fingers gently to the soil beside the seedling and said, very quietly, to no one in particular, "Good." Behind her from the cabin doorway, Bet's voice emerged with the careful softness of someone who had been watching and had decided, for once, not to say the loud thing. "There's tea," Bet said, "if you want." Stellin didn't turn around. "What kind?" "The kind that's actually tea and not bark water." A pause. "I've been practicing." Stellin almost smiled, then did smile, then stood and turned and went inside. The crow arrived first. Stellin was in the garden with Oswin, who had, in 3 weeks, transformed the staked plot into something that looked aggressively intentional, with rows and borders and a small irrigation channel he'd dug by hand that Petra had inspected and declared structurally sound with the solemn approval of someone reviewing a bridge, when the bird landed on the fence post nearest her left shoulder and simply sat there, regarding her with the particular intensity of a creature that had somewhere to be, and was deciding whether she was worth the delay. "That's not a normal crow," Oswin said. "No," Stellin agreed. It had a leather tube on its leg, thin and sealed. She looked at it for a moment, then at the bird, which held very still in the way of trained animals that have learned patience from repeated experience. She reached out slowly and unclipped the tube. The crow ruffled once, resettled, and continued watching. Inside the tube was a single strip of paper. "Mother. I'm coming home. Something is wrong. The letters stopped 3 months ago and the last one before that didn't sound like you. Tell me where you are." Her hands were completely steady. She was proud of this later when she thought back on it, that her hands had been steady. Everything else was not. The full weight of 5 years of not knowing landing at once, the relief and the grief arriving simultaneously and inseparably. But her hands had held the paper without shaking. Oswin, who was sensitive to atmosphere in the way of people who had spent most of their lives trying to read rooms for safety, quietly put down his trowel and went to find Bet. Stellin sat down on the ground between the garden rows and read the message 4 more times. Then she turned the paper over and wrote on the back with the stub of charcoal she kept in her apron pocket for marking measurements. East Road from Iron Spire. Past the Great Oak, take the eastern fork. Follow the green. She reattached the tube. The crow was gone before her hand had finished the motion. Everin arrived 2 days later, and he arrived the way he had always done everything: fast, direct, and slightly ahead of schedule. He was 31, tall like his father had been before age settled him, with Stellin's eyes and a jaw that had made its own decisions somewhere around his 20th year. He rode into the clearing at a pace that was not quite reckless but was definitely confident, pulled up short when he saw the cabin, the garden, the shored walls. The 4 people who looked up from various tasks with the combined expression of people interrupted mid-competence and sat very still on his horse for a moment, processing the differential between what he'd expected and what was in front of him. Then he saw Stellin. He was off the horse before it had fully stopped, which was either impressive athleticism or a minor miracle of momentum, and Stellin had taken approximately 1 step forward before he reached her, and she had both arms full of her son, who was, she noted with the particular precision of mothers, taller than she remembered and smelled like 2 weeks of hard riding, and was holding on with the specific force of someone who had been frightened for a long time and was only now allowing themselves to stop. She held on back with equal force and said nothing, because nothing needed saying yet. Behind them, Bet made a sound that was definitely not crying, and then immediately redirected it into something culinary. "I'm making food," she announced to no one. A real amount of food. Stellin, I need that smoked fish. You said you weren't going to touch the smoked fish. Circumstances have changed. Stellin looked at Stellin over Everin's shoulder, and she caught his eyes briefly, something quiet and warm in them, there and then deliberately set aside, the look of a man who was glad and had decided that was sufficient for now. And then he went to get the fish. The telling took 2 hours. Everin sat across the fire from his mother with the focused stillness of someone filing everything away in real time, and Stellin told him, all of it, plainly, without softening the edges, because he was 31 years old and had ridden 2 weeks on incomplete information and deserved the truth at full weight. She told him about Cyrath appearing 6 months ago like smoke in an empty room, about the court gone hollow-eyed and obedient, about the dissolution, 4 minutes, the bag, the coin, the road east. When she reached the part about the coin, the twin wolf sigil, for luck not for spending, something moved across Everin's face that she recognized because she had felt it herself standing at the crossroads. The particular grief of understanding something too late to change the before, but not too late to change the after. The letters, he said. All of them for 5 years. She was writing them. Cyrath. Yes, she knew where I was. She knew I wasn't coming back yet. His jaw tightened. She had 5 years with no interference. Yes. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, Father. He's not, Everin, listen to me carefully. He is not the man who stood in that court. Whatever made those decisions, whatever spoke those words, it was not him. I watched his hands. She paused. I know his hands. Everin looked at her with the expression of a man trying to hold 2 true things simultaneously. The fury that needed somewhere to go, and the love that refused to be entirely extinguished by it. How are you? He started, then stopped. Looked at the garden, at the cabin, at Oswin's irrigation channel, at Petra's shored walls. How are you this? This? Calm, building things. Already. He gestured at the clearing with the mild bewilderment of someone who had expected devastation and found industry. You've been here 5 weeks. Stellin looked at her hands. The bond mark on her left palm. The earth still under her nails from the morning's work. I decided something, she said slowly. Somewhere between the crossroads and this clearing, that I was not going to spend whatever time I had left being defined by what was done to me. She met his eyes. I spent 48 years being someone's Luna. I intend to spend whatever comes next being myself. Everin looked at her for a long moment. Who are you? He asked, not cruelly, with genuine, open curiosity. She almost laughed. I'm finding out. 3 territories west, Cyrath felt the ring crack wider. She was in the middle of a formal audience, pack members presenting concerns, the tedious machinery of governance she had mastered across a dozen reigns. And the fracture pulsed once, sharp and unmistakable. And she dismissed the audience mid-sentence with a smile that stopped all questions cold. Alone in the great hall, she pressed her thumb to the ring and assessed the damage. Wider. Faster than it should be. Something in Gravewin was accelerating the law's effect, some variable she hadn't calculated, and she turned the problem over with the cold efficiency of a mind that had 3 centuries of practice with emergencies. The sun had arrived. She had felt the crow's flight like a needle through the web she'd built, one thread pulled loose, and she knew what it meant. Everin would start asking questions that her carefully constructed letters could no longer answer. The timeline had compressed. She needed Raor unquestionably under before the sun reached Ironspire, and she needed to deal with Gravewin. She had avoided direct action there, reasoning that distance was sufficient, that the law would activate slowly, that Stellin would exhaust herself and the territory would go dormant again without the sustained presence of a... She stopped herself. Reconsidered. Luna, she thought, with the first genuine unease she had felt in decades. Not just any expelled mate. A Luna who built things. She had miscalculated. She pulled from the ring deliberately, not fighting the crack, but redirecting the energy it was losing, pouring it back into the anchor that held Raor's mind. It cost her. She could feel it in the real body beneath this face, the ache of centuries pulling closer to the surface, and she pushed it back down with practiced force. Then she called for a messenger. It was time to remind Gravewin that the world beyond its borders had not forgotten it existed. The men arrived at dawn on a Tuesday. There were 6 of them, all wearing the colors of no pack Stellin recognized. Deliberately, she realized, which was itself information. Anonymous muscle, hired to deliver a message that the sender didn't want traced. They rode into the clearing with the casual authority of people who expected to find a handful of displaced settlers and were visibly recalibrating when they found, instead, Stellin standing at the garden fence, Petra on the cabin roof with a hammer and an expression of professional assessment, Oswin frozen mid-irrigation with a look of someone rapidly running probability calculations, Everin near the tree line with the contained stillness of a trained alpha who had clocked them before they'd cleared the path, and Stellin, who had been splitting wood and had simply stopped and set down the axe with the particular deliberateness of a man who wanted it noted that he had set it down. The lead writer spoke to Stellin. "The territory of Gravewin is under claim review. You'll need to vacate." Stellin looked at him with the expression she had developed over 48 years of court management, the one that communicated complete attention and absolute immovability, without raising her voice a single degree. "Under whose authority?" "The Crown of Ironspire." She let the silence sit for a moment, let him hear it. "I purchased this property," she said, "with legal tender. I have established continuous residence. I have made substantial improvements to land that was abandoned and unclaimed." She folded her hands in front of her. "Under what specific provision of Packland law does the Crown assert claim over personally purchased, actively occupied, improved property?" The man opened his mouth. "Take your time," she said pleasantly. "I'll wait." From the roof, Petra resumed hammering, not aggressively, just continuing her work with the focused professionalism of someone who considered this interruption beneath her notice. The lead writer looked at his colleagues, at Everin, who had not moved, but had somehow become more present in the way of people trained to do exactly that. At Stellin, who was still standing beside the axe he had set down, a detail that Stellin suspected was doing considerable work. "I'll need to report back," the man said. "Please do," Stellin said. "Tell whoever sent you that the land is occupied, improved, and not vacating. And that if there is a legitimate legal challenge to be made, I will meet it through every proper channel available to me." A pause, the particular kind that arrives just before the thing that matters. "I spent 48 years learning exactly where every channel is." They left. Bet emerged from the cabin doorway with a pot in each hand and an expression of profound personal satisfaction. "I made breakfast," she announced, "for everyone, including the intimidating strangers, but they left, which is their loss because I've genuinely improved." Oswin exhaled very slowly. Everin looked at Stellin with something that lived between pride and wonder. "You didn't even raise your voice." "I've never needed to." She turned back toward the garden. Raised voices are for people who aren't certain they're right. But her hands, she noticed, as she pressed them to the earth to check the morning's growth, were not entirely steady. Because she knew, with the bone-deep certainty she had learned to trust over 5 weeks of reading this land, that those men had not come because of a land claim. They had come because someone had noticed that Gravewin was waking up, and that someone was afraid of what it was waking up into. That evening, after the others had gone inside, Stellin sat beside her at the fire without being asked, and didn't speak for a while, which she had come to understand as his version of company, present, quiet, leaving her room to be whatever she needed to be in the moment. "You knew they'd back down," he said eventually. "I knew they had no legal ground," she said. "That's not quite the same thing," but it's enough." "Who taught you that?" She was quiet for a moment. "I taught myself. Over 48 years of being the person in the room that everyone assumed was decorative." She looked at the fire. "You learn a great deal when people underestimate you. They talk freely. They don't guard their logic. You can see exactly where the weakness is." He turned to look at her, that full, direct attention that she still required adjustment for. "They'll come back," he said, "with more." "I know." "What will you do?" She pressed her palm to the ground beside her. The earth was warm, warmer every day now, and the pulse beneath it, that living, patient, quietly insistent pulse, pressed back. "I'll keep building," she said. "That's what I'll do. Whatever comes, I will keep building until what I've built is too real to unmake." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I built something once, before Gravewin. I thought if I built carefully enough, generously enough." He stopped, chose. "I thought goodness was a kind of protection." "It isn't," she said. "No." A long pause. "But I think it might be something better than protection." She looked at him sideways. "What?" The firelight moved across his face, and he looked back at the flames with that expression she had catalogued over 5 weeks without meaning to, the one that appeared when he was about to say something he'd been carrying for a while. "A foundation," he said quietly, "something you can actually build on." The fire crackled. Somewhere in the garden, the seedlings Oswin had planted were doing the slow, determined work of becoming. Inside the cabin, Bet's voice floated out. She was telling Everin something that involved, from the fragments, both a goat and a regional council, which suggested it was either a long story or several short ones that had collided. Stellin looked at the fire and felt, not for the first time but more clearly than before, the specific weight of what was growing here. Not just the garden. Not just the walls, something she didn't have a name for yet. She suspected, with the quiet certainty that had been her most reliable instrument for 52 years, that she would. In 50 miles west, Raor woke from a dream of warm earth and 3 notes of a song he couldn't name, with his left hand pressed flat to the cold stone floor beside his bed, and tears on his face he couldn't explain. He lay there in the dark and did not call for Cyrath. For the first time in 6 months, he did not call for Cyrath. He just lay still and let himself feel the burning in his palm and thought, very carefully, "I know this. I know this. What do I know?" The fog pressed in, but it pressed in slower than before. Everin rode into Ironspire at midday, which was deliberate. Midday meant witnesses. Midday meant the market square full, the pack going about its ordinary business, every elder and warrior and omega who might later claim they hadn't seen anything unable to make that claim. He had learned this from his mother, though she had never taught it directly. She had simply lived it for 48 years, the quiet, strategic intelligence of a woman who understood that timing was its own kind of language. He rode in alone. No colors, no formal announcement. Just a man on a tired horse arriving home after 5 years, which was true enough to hold up under inspection. The gate guards recognized him immediately, because of course they did. He was the prince. He had grown up inside these walls. Half the pack had watched him learn to walk. What he saw in their faces when they recognized him was not the welcome he had grown up receiving. It was the expression of people caught between instinct and instruction, loyalty pulling one direction and fear pulling another, and he read it clearly for what it was. "We know you. We are not sure we are allowed to know you anymore." He rode through without stopping and went directly to the Great Hall. Cyrath was holding court. She sat in Raor's chair, not beside it, not in a secondary seat, but in the Alpha's chair itself. And she was speaking to a group of pack elders with the practiced authority of someone who had been doing this for decades in various skins, and the elders were listening with those hollow eyes Stellin had described, present and emptied, and entirely without the particular friction of genuine engagement. Raor sat beside her in a lesser chair. Everin stopped in the doorway and looked at his father. Raor had aged, not the natural aging of 5 years, something deeper, something that had happened to the interior of him and showed through the surface the way water damage shows through plaster. He sat with the careful stillness of a man conserving something, and his left hand rested on his knee with the unconscious pressure of someone holding onto a rope in dark water, and his eyes, when they finally moved to the doorway and found his son's face, did something that Cyrath's careful architecture had not fully anticipated. They filled, not with fog, with recognition, with the specific, piercing, entirely unmanageable recognition of a parent who has not seen their child in 5 years and whose body remembers love even when the mind has been rearranged around it. "Everin," he said. Just that. A sound like something breaking clean. Cyrath's head turned with the smooth precision of a creature that does not startle, but does recalculate. Her amber eyes found Everin in the doorway, and the warmth in them did not waver. But the ring on her right hand pulsed once, hard, and the crack in it widened by a degree that she felt in her real body like a rib separating. "Prince Everin," she said, and her voice was warm and welcoming and completely in control. "We weren't expecting you for another month." "I finished early," Everin said pleasantly, walking into the hall. "I was eager to see my family." He crossed to his father and took the old man's face in both hands, the way Stellin had held him in Gravewin, and Raor made a sound he immediately tried to suppress and failed completely. And for just a moment, just the span of a breath, the fog thinned. Everin felt it, the way you feel a door give before it opens. He pressed his forehead to his father's and said, very quietly, directly into his ear, "I know. I'm here. Hold on." Behind them, Cyrath rose from the Alpha's chair. The elders, responding to some frequency below speech, rose with her. The cracking began 3 days later, and it did not begin subtly. Everin had spent those 3 days moving carefully, speaking to every pack member he could reach without triggering Cyrath's interference, planting questions that didn't look like questions and observations that didn't look like strategy. He was his mother's son in this. The same patient intelligence, the same understanding that the most effective pressure is applied slowly and at exactly the right point. What he had not planned was Raor. His father had begun, in the 3 days since Everin's arrival, to dream differently. Something had shifted in the architecture of the fog. Perhaps the weight of Gravewin's growing power 50 miles east. Perhaps the sustained presence of his son. Perhaps simply the accumulated pressure of a love that had been running its slow current beneath the fog for 6 months and had finally found a crack wide enough to move through. Whatever the cause, Raor had begun waking at odd hours with fragments that were not gray and formless but specific. The smell of pine resin, a song in 3 notes, the pressure of a hand flat against stone. On the 3rd night he woke and sat up and said to the empty room, "She checked the foundation stones." He did not know where the sentence came from. He only knew it was true. He was at the window before he was fully conscious of standing, looking east down the road, and his palm was burning so intensely that he pressed it against the cold stone of the sill and felt, through the stone, through the distance, through 6 months of careful constructed fog, the faintest pulse of something warm pressing back. He closed his eyes. Stellin, he thought. And then, because thinking it once had not broken him completely, Stellin. Stellin. What did I do? The fog convulsed. It was the wrong word for what happened, but the closest available one. A shudder through the entire constructed interior landscape of his mind, the way a building shudders when a foundation stone shifts. And in the shudder, things fell. Not all at once, but enough. A summer evening in the orchards, her laughing at something he'd said, the specific sound of it. Everin, at 3 years old, carried between them on a walk around the walls, her hands on the bond seal ceremony, shaking slightly, looking up at him with those eyes that had seen him, actually seen him, not the king, not the alpha, him, from the very first day. He pressed harder against the sill. Cyrath appeared in the doorway. She had been appearing faster lately, response time shortening, which itself was information. She crossed the room quickly and reached for his face, the way she always reached for his face, and he caught her wrist. She went completely still. He had never done that before. He looked at her hand, her right hand, the one with the ring, and in the moonlight from the window he could see it clearly for the first time, the crack running through the gold band, thin but unmistakable, and something leaking from it that had no color he could name, something that smelled like very old stone and burned his palm through the air between them. "What is that?" he said. "Raor. What is that?" His voice was not raised. It was the voice of a man who has just understood something and is standing very still inside the understanding, because moving might shatter it before he can see the full shape. "What are you?" Cyrath looked at him, and something in her, the thing that had been running for 3 centuries, the thing that had worn so many faces it had almost forgotten there was something underneath them all, made a decision that was not strategy, but something older and more desperate than strategy. She let him see. Just for a moment. Just the edges. The face beneath the face. The real age pressing through the stolen youth. The amber eyes going briefly gold and wrong and ancient and hungry in a way that had nothing to do with the warmth she performed and everything to do with what she actually was. Raor released her wrist. He stepped back. And the fog, hit from the inside by the full force of what he had just seen, cracked down the middle like ice under weight. She knew something had happened before the crow arrived. The bond mark on her palm had burned all night. Not the low, persistent warmth she had grown accustomed to, but a sharp, insistent heat, rhythmic, like someone knocking on a door from the other side. She had pressed it to the earth and felt the territory pulse back, steady and grounding, and she had sat with both for hours while the others slept, held between 2 frequencies she could not yet name. The crow arrived at dawn with Everin's handwriting on the paper inside the tube. "It's breaking. Come if you're willing. No obligation. But he's asking for you. And for the first time in 6 months, it's actually him asking." She read it 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and held it in both hands and sat very still for a long while, looking at the garden where Oswin's plants were growing with cheerful determination. At the cabin walls Petra had shored into genuine solidity. At the cleared well that had run clean for 4 weeks. At the path through the settlement, because it was a settlement now, 14 people, a well, a garden, 4 sound structures and 2 more in progress. The beginning of something that had a shape she could almost see entire. Bet found her there an hour later, which meant Bet had been awake and watching, and had correctly judged that an hour was the right amount of time to give her. "Tea," Bet said, and sat down beside her without being asked. "You saw the message." "I didn't read it," Bet said, with the careful dignity of someone who absolutely had. "But Everin's crow has a very expressive face." Stellin looked at her sideways. "I'm just saying," Bet said. "Crows know things." Stellin looked down at the folded paper. "He's waking up." "I know." 48 years, Bet. She said it quietly, not as argument, just as weight. 48 years and I know exactly who he was before this. I know his hands. I know the song he sings when he thinks no one is listening. I know that he loved me the way—" She stopped, breathed. "I know he loved me." "Yes," Bet said, "and I also know who I am now." She pressed her palm flat to the earth. The pulse came back immediately, warm and certain. "I know what this is, what I built, what I am when I'm just myself, not a Luna, not a title, me." Bette was quiet, which for Betty was a significant event. "What do you want?" she asked finally. No strategy in it, no direction, just the question, clean and open. Stellin thought of Raor's hands trembling at his sides in the Grand Court, thought of Stellin saying a foundation with the careful voice of a man who had stopped hoping and was perhaps, slowly, beginning again. Thought of this clearing, this earth, these 14 people who had come because something true was being built here. "I want to go," she said, "and I want to come back." She folded the paper smaller. "Not to stay there, not to go back to what was. I want to go and look him in the eye and see what's left when the fog is gone. And I want to make sure Everin is safe. And I want to close what needs closing." She looked up at the lightening sky. "And then I want to come home." Bet made a sound. "What?" Stellin said. "Nothing." Bet's voice was doing something complicated. "You said home." Stellin looked around the clearing. At the cabin, at the garden, at the ground that had been dead for 60 years and was not dead anymore. "Yes," she said quietly. "I did." Stellin was splitting wood when she found him, which she suspected was where he went when he was thinking, the physical work of it giving the thoughts somewhere to go. He heard her footsteps and didn't stop immediately, finishing the split he was on with the clean economy of someone who completes things, and then he set the axe down and turned. She handed him Everin's message without explanation. He read it, handed it back, looked at the woodpile for a moment with an expression she had learned to read, as him deciding how much of what he was feeling to let into his face. "When?" he said. "Tomorrow morning." A pause. "How long?" "I don't know." She held his gaze. "I need to go. I need to see what's true when the fog is gone. I need Everin to be safe, and I need to—" She stopped. "I need to close what needs closing, whatever that looks like." He nodded, one of those nods that contained considerably more than agreement. "This will be here," he said. "What you've built. It doesn't go anywhere." "I know." She held his gaze for a long moment, his honest face, his careful words, the particular quality of his attention that had been, over 9 weeks, one of the most unexpectedly steadying things she had encountered in her life. "So will I." Something moved through his expression, there and then carefully, deliberately set aside, the look of a man who had learned patience through necessity and had found it, somewhere along the way, becoming genuine. "Then go," he said. "Come back." She pressed her palm briefly to his arm, just that, brief and certain, and turned toward the cabin to pack. Behind her, Stellin picked up the axe and went back to work. From the cabin doorway, Bet watched all of this with the expression of a woman who had engineered something rather well and was exercising enormous restraint about saying so. She lasted approximately 4 seconds. "Oswin," she called toward the garden. "I told you." "You tell me many things," Oswin called back. This one was right. At Ironspire, Cyrath stood in the Great Hall while her ring continued its slow collapse and felt, for the first time in 3 centuries, the specific cold of being genuinely afraid, not of losing the throne. Thrones were replaceable, interchangeable. She had occupied and vacated dozens of them across lifetimes. What she was afraid of, with the sudden and total clarity of someone who has run so long they've forgotten what they were running from, was what happened when the ring finally broke entirely. When the face fell. When the body she had hidden for 300 years became the only body she had. She had been so many people. She could not remember, with any precision, who she had been first. She pressed her thumb to the crack and felt it widen under the pressure, felt her real hand, the one beneath this hand, ancient and barely held, tremble with the effort of maintaining what was left. Faster, she thought. But for the first time, she was not certain faster was possible. Stellin rode into Ironspire at midday, not because of strategy, though it was sound strategy, and her mother's instincts recognized it. But because she had left Gravewin at dawn, and the road was 50 miles, and she had not hurried, she had ridden at a pace that gave her time to look at the landscape she had crossed on foot 9 weeks ago, broken and carrying one bag and one coin, and to measure the distance between that woman and this one. It was not a comfortable measurement. It was an honest one, which was better. The gate guard saw her coming from a quarter mile out. By the time she reached the gate, there were 12 of them, and not one stepped forward to stop her, which told her everything she needed to know about what had happened in Ironspire in the 3 days since Everin sent his crow. People do not step aside for someone they've been told to forget, unless the thing they were told to forget has become, suddenly and undeniably, more real than the instruction. She rode through without stopping. The market square was full and went quiet as she passed, the particular quiet of a crowd that has been holding its breath for days and has just heard the door open. She did not look left or right. She looked forward, toward the great hall, toward the doors she had walked out of 9 weeks ago with a bag that didn't close properly, and she felt the bond mark on her left palm burning with a heat so steady and clear it was almost sound. Everin met her at the doors. He looked like he had not slept in 3 days, which she suspected was accurate, and he looked at her with an expression that mixed relief and something carefully controlled that she recognized as his version of, "I have things to tell you that are not easy." "He's awake," Everin said quietly. "Mostly. The fog it's breaking on its own now. Has been since the night he saw what she was." A pause. "It's not, Mother, it's not clean. What he's coming back to, what he remembers doing." "I know," she said. "He hasn't asked me to bring you here. He told me specifically not to, that you owed him nothing, that coming back had to be your choice entirely." Everin held her gaze. "I sent the crow anyway. I know that too." She put her hand briefly on his face, her boy, her 31-year-old boy who had ridden 2 weeks on bad information and handled all of it with more grace than she had any right to expect. And then she walked inside. The great hall was empty except for Raor. He was standing at the far end, not at the Alpha's chair. The Alpha's chair had been moved to the side, she noticed, pushed out of the center of the room as though he couldn't stand to be near it. But at the window, in the same posture Everin had described, left hand on the stone sill, eyes on the eastern road. He heard her footsteps and went completely still. She walked the length of the hall. Her boots on the stone floor made the same sound they had always made in this room, and she watched him register it, the specific rhythm of it, the particular sound of her particular walk that he had known for 48 years, and watched his shoulders change. Something leaving them, something arriving. He turned. He looked, she thought, like a man who has survived something and is still in the first hours of understanding what survival costs. The fog was gone from his eyes. She could see that immediately, the glassy, obedient blankness replaced by the exhausted, clear, devastated presence of a man who was entirely himself and could not escape a single moment of it. He was thinner, older in ways that had nothing to do with years. His left hand came up, not reaching for her, not presuming, just showing her the bond mark on his palm. Burning, she could see it even from here, the old sigil lit from within. "I know what I did," he said. His voice was Raor's voice, stripped of everything performative, the voice she had heard at 2 a.m. for decades, honest and unguarded and entirely his. "I remember all of it, every word, every—" He stopped, breathed. "I remember your face when Stellin, I cannot—" "Stop," she said quietly. He stopped. She looked at him for a long moment. At this man she had loved for 48 years, whom she knew better than she knew almost anything, whose hands she could have identified blindfolded, whose guilt was currently so enormous it was filling the room like weather. She looked at him and did not feel what she had expected to feel. She did not feel the answer. "I came," she said carefully. Because Everin is here, and I needed to know he was safe. And because there are things that need to be said between us that cannot be sent by Crow. She clasped her hands in front of her. A gesture he would recognize, her thinking posture. The one that meant, I am about to say something true, and I need you to hear all of it. I do not blame you for what the fog made you do. I have never, not once, believed that man in the court was you. She held his gaze. But I also cannot stand here and tell you that it didn't happen, that I didn't walk out of those doors with one bag and one coin, that I didn't spend 9 weeks rebuilding myself from the ground up in land everyone called cursed. Her voice was steady. She was proud of this. It happened, and the woman who walked out those doors is not the woman who is standing in front of you now. Raor closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they were wet, and he did not try to hide it. Who are you now? He asked. And it was the same question Everin had asked her in Gravewin, the same genuine open curiosity. And it landed differently here, because here it came from a man who was also asking, is there anything left for me? I'm finding out, she said. That's the honest answer. She took a breath. What I know is that I have built something in Gravewin. Something real, something that belongs to me, not to a title or a bond or anyone else's need. And I am not leaving it. She looked at him with the full, clear weight of everything she was. That is not negotiable. Raor nodded, a slow, effortful nod. I know. His voice broke slightly on the second word, and he let it break, didn't smooth it over. Stellin, I am not asking you to come back. I am not asking you for anything. He pressed his fist briefly to his chest, over his heart, the old pack gesture that predated words. I just needed you to know that I am sorry, that I am here. That whatever is left of me when all of this is done, I intend to spend it being worthy of the son we raised and the memory of the man you married. A pause. Whether you are here to see it or not. She held his gaze for a long moment, and then she crossed the room and took his left hand in both of hers and pressed the bond marks together, palm to palm, the way they had pressed them at the sealing ceremony when they were young, and the world was enormous, and they had no idea what it would ask of them. The marks burned together, one clean pulse, and then, gently, quietly, with the finality of something that has been waiting to be released, went warm and still. Not gone. Not broken. Finished, she thought. Complete. She stepped back. Be good to our son, she said. Be the king you were. She almost smiled. And fix the fountain. The East Wolf's ear has been chipped for 6 years and you kept forgetting. Raor made a sound that was caught between a laugh and something far less composed. He pressed his hand over his eyes for a moment. When he lowered it, he was looking at her with the expression she knew better than any other, the one that had always said, "You are the most remarkable person I have ever known." She turned and walked back down the hall. She did not look back, but she heard him, very quietly, in the voice she had almost lost forever. Thank you for coming. I came for myself, she said, still walking. But you're welcome. Cyrath's end came the following morning, in the courtyard, in front of the full pack. She had known it was coming. Perhaps that was why she came to the courtyard herself, without being summoned. 3 centuries of survival instinct, recognizing the precise moment when survival was no longer available. The ring had fractured overnight into 4 separate pieces that barely held their shape, and the face she wore had been slipping since dawn, the edges imprecise, the warmth it projected thin and effortful. Stellin was there, Raor beside her, not touching, but present. The 2 of them standing together, not as bonded mates, but as 2 people who had shared 48 years and 1 son, and would carry that in whatever shape their lives now held. The pack gathered in a loose circle, and no one spoke, because there was nothing to say that the morning wasn't already saying. Cyrath stood in the center and pressed her thumb to the ring one last time. It dissolved. What stood in the courtyard then was not the woman with the amber eyes and the winter flower crown. It was what had always been standing there, underneath. 300 years of stolen time wearing the shape of a woman, age pressing through from beneath like roots through stone, the real face surfacing at last. Not monstrous, Stellin thought, watching, just ancient and exhausted and entirely, unutterably alone. The face of someone who had been so afraid of what she was that she had spent 3 centuries being everyone else. Cyrath looked at Stellin, and what Stellin saw in those eyes, in the last moment before the last of the stolen magic collapsed inward and took everything with it, was not malevolence. It was recognition. "You chose yourself," those eyes said. "I never learned how." Then the magic broke, turned inward, consumed what remained, and where Cyrath had stood there was a stillness. And in the stillness, on the courtyard stone, a mark like frost, the outline of a woman 300 years old, pressed into the ground like a memory the earth had decided to keep. The pack stood in silence. Raor looked at the mark for a long time, and then looked east. Stellin rode home at dawn. She crossed the great oak marker as the light turned gold, took the eastern fork without hesitation, and followed the green, which was visible now from the fork itself, a thread of living color running through the gray canopy like a vein of something precious in old stone. By the time the clearing came into view, the sun was fully up, and Gravewin was lit in a way she had not yet seen it. The gray canopy broken through in 3 places by shafts of genuine warm light, Oswin's garden blazing with the particular triumphant green of things growing in ground that was no longer afraid. Stellin was at the fence line. He had been working, she could tell, tools in hand, the focused quiet of morning labor. But he had stopped, and he was watching her ride in with an expression he had not entirely managed to arrange into neutral before she was close enough to read it. She dismounted. They stood on either side of the fence for a moment, and he looked at her the way he always looked at her, completely, honestly, without performance, and waited. "I'm back," she said. "I see that." A pause, the considered kind. "Are you?" "Yes," she said before he could finish, because she knew what he was asking, and the answer was yes, entirely and without reservation. She was all right. She was more than all right. She was... She pressed her palm to the fence post between them, felt the wood warm under her hand, felt the territory pulse beneath her feet with its steady living certainty. Herself. Fully, finally, irreversibly herself. He put his hand over hers on the post, not claiming, not asking. Just present. The way he was always present, solid and honest and entirely without pretense, the way good ground is present, reliable, not dramatic, available to whatever grows in it. From the cabin, Bet's voice arrived like a fanfare. "She's back. Oswin, I told you. Petra, come out. The porridge is ready and it has a new name." "What's it called?" Oswin called from the garden. A pause of great theatrical weight. "Home," Bet announced. Stellin looked at Stellin. Stellin looked at Stellin. "She's been workshopping that for 2 days," he said. "I know," Stellin said. "It's perfect." She pushed open the fence gate and walked into her kingdom. Epilogue. 1 year later. They called it Veyu. The settlers named it, collectively and without ceremony, one evening around the communal fire when someone pointed out that the territory needed a name that wasn't about death. It had 63 residents by the end of the first year. Oh well, 4 permanent structures, 12 more in progress. A garden that Oswin had expanded 3 times and was now teaching 2 apprentices, and a small stone hall at the center that Petra had designed and everyone had built together over the course of 1 long summer, working in shifts, arguing cheerfully about the drainage, fed throughout by Bet, whose cooking had by this point achieved a genuine and unironic reputation. Raor came once, in the autumn, with Everin. He stood at the gate of the settlement, and looked at what his Luna had built from one coin and cursed ground, and he wept without trying to stop himself, and Everin stood beside him and did not pretend otherwise. He did not ask to come in. He had not been invited, and he understood the distinction. But Stellin came to the gate herself, and they stood together in the autumn light, the two of them, and talked for a long while. Not about what had been lost, but about Everin, about Ironspire, about the fountain which had been repaired, the East Wolf's ear restored. About small things. The language of people who have shared a life and are learning what shape the connection holds when its old architecture is gone. Before he left, Raor pressed something into her hand. A coin, new minted, the twin wolf sigil sharp and clear, warm from his palm. "For luck," he said. "Not for spending." She closed her fingers around it. "You fixed the fountain," she said. "First thing," he said. She watched him ride away with their son beside him and felt, not grief, not relief, but something complete. A circle closed. A story told all the way to its true ending. She turned back to her kingdom. Stellin was at the stone hall, doing something structural to the doorframe that he had mentioned 3 days ago needed doing. He glanced up when she crossed the yard, took one look at her face, and said nothing. Just moved slightly to the left to make room for her beside him. She stood next to him in the autumn light and looked at Vernu. The garden blazing green, the well that ran clear, the people going about the work of a life being genuinely lived, the gray canopy now broken through in a dozen places by sky. She pressed her palm to the doorframe. Warm stone, good join, solid ground. "It's real," she said quietly. "It is," Stellin agreed. She had not meant it as a question, but she was glad all the same to hear the answer. If you've listened this far, thank you for staying. Tell me in the comments, which moment of this story stayed with you the most? The humiliation in the Great Hall, the gold coin, the moment Gravewin began to awaken, or the instant Stellin chose herself? And if you want more stories like this one, of women who are cast out, who build, who choose, let me know down here. I have more to tell you.